Mary has real influence in the world. We as American Christians sometimes treat spirituality in an abstract way, as though we have certain things that we believe or personal experiences that we can never share, and that's the extent of faith. Well, what the Battle of Lepanto teaches us is that Mary's literally going to conquer the Turks for you if you ask. That's pretty amazing. The Muslims were an incredibly powerful empire in the 15th century, and we're going to the 16th century, and we're going to study that and see how Our Lady plays an incredible role. So we're going to set the stage talking about the Turks. You have to understand that for 750 years, there was a holy war according to the Muslims. And that holy war was declared on the entire world of Christians. And so if you look at this upper map, this is the top of Africa here, it's hard to see. But Muhammad had ordered his various powers, starting in the Quran itself, to occupy and pillage every Christian capital. And they kept falling one after another. I mean, we're not talking about small areas, we're talking about centers of Christendom that were at the core of the evangelization of Jesus Christ. Jerusalem fell. Think about that. Not to mention Antioch, Alexandria, Hippo, Augustine's holy birthplace, and even at one point out, Spain fell. And so there was an incredible danger to Christendom. And it was first from without, from the Turks, through the Muslims, who had a religious obligation. I want to talk about jihad just briefly here. But the notion of holy war is something that's enshrined in their sacred text. And these days, there are more intellectual and scholarly interpretations of what jihad means. But historically, jihad has meant something very simple, which is you have a caliphate, and you try to conquer lands that were Islamic at one point or could be Islamic. And so historically, the whole empire of Islam, the whole Turkish empire, was ordered towards military conquest. There's sort of no argument about that. There was an intellectual culture in Islam, there was an art culture, but there was fundamentally a culture of the caliphate that was passed on through the Ottoman Empire, and that up until some of the battles that we're going to be talking about briefly were expanding without a lot of resistance. And by the time of the 16th century, when we're going to be talking about this Battle of Lepanto, the Ottoman Empire was as powerful as it had ever been. It was more powerful, militarily speaking, than the Christians by a considerable amount. Not only in the areas that the Christians had already developed in some significant ways, like firearms were just being developed in the 16th century, and major advances were happening in maritime military technology. So ships, we'll be talking a little bit about the ships and how much those changed at this time. But the thing that the Ottoman Empire had that was different was slaves. Everywhere they went, when they conquered all these cities, they took slaves and they used the slaves. And they used the slaves in all of the ways that military conquest can uniquely utilize slaves in a very brutal way. So when you're going to be learning about some of the ships that we're talking about, when we're hearing about some of these conquests that happened, a lot of that was literally on the backs of slaves who were running the ships, who were doing the dirty work. Some of them kidnapped from their youth and raised that way. Why am I painting things so starkly? Well, it's just pretty simple. The Ottoman Empire at the point that we're going to be talking about is deeply corrupt, and you're going to see that. I have 2 slideshows that I'm changing. Now, as bad as the situation was because of the Ottoman Empire, things were not good in Christendom either. So, in the 16th century, Christendom started to collapse in a serious way. The Protestant Reformation was not just a reformation of doctrine, it was a political revolution. It was a revolution that fractured Christendom in Europe permanently, and the effects of the Protestant Revolution is still felt to this day. Protestants not only were responsible, sometimes with Catholics, for all kinds of bloodshed within Christian countries, they were responsible for the collapse of a lot of political and economic order that up until that point was part of what made Christendom strong. And part of the notion of Christendom was that the temporal order could be sanctified by the higher order of the church. And so the Protestant Reformation, in a deep and fundamental way, fractured Europe. Moreover, even amongst the Catholics, there was tons of squabbling and politics happening that was really wrecking the unity of the church. Just for example, the Habsburg empires, which were the two empires of Austria and Spain, had completely different treaties and economic arrangements with the Turks. The Austrian Empire was perfectly fine parleying with the Turks and enjoying the good business that they were having with the Muslims, whereas the Spanish recognized that there was a deep cultural problem with that, and there was disagreement even in that very family. And, you know, we were talking about, of course, primarily the Roman Church in this talk, but the Eastern Church was also in crisis. And one way that they were particularly in crisis in this time is very interesting studies. So there were heresies that were just replete in Eastern Orthodoxy. All kinds of different denials of fundamental doctrines were rearing their heads at this time. And it was a very ugly scene for Eastern Christianity, too, in the face of the invasion of the Ottoman Empire and their internal collapse. So not only do we have this huge, powerful outside force, but Christendom itself has lost its core identity and is squabbling about a lot of political things that don't essentially define what it is, but because of the disagreement, they are weakened. Okay, so this is just a map of Christendom that I'm going to show you just to give you a sense of where things are. It's always very difficult when you're doing a historical presentation to make sure that everyone is up to speed about maps and where things are. And honestly, there are a lot of details, especially since I only had a day to plan this talk, that I am not immediately familiar with. And so we can play Stump the Headmaster after this, and I'm sure you'll do very well. This just gives you a broad picture of the Holy Roman Empire and some of the other Catholic states, and how they were very closely about to be infringed on by the Ottoman Empire. So Spain was Catholic, France was Catholic, the Holy Roman Empire, which was all kind of central and northern Europe, was Catholic. And then you had a variety of papal states here. Naples, here are some other places that are going to be important. Malta, over here. And Cyprus over here. Notice this. And this map, by the way, is from 1580, so it was actually after all of the events transpired. So what's very interesting, you just notice is that the Battle of Cyprus, which we're going to be talking about, within 10 years of the battle, it was already conquered by the Turks. So we're going to think about that a little bit. So the point is here is that this is a part of Europe that I think that most of you are probably not super familiar with. Yes, or maybe you studied the Mediterranean closely. I don't know, I didn't. But the Mediterranean is a complex place, and it was complex in the Middle Ages too. And so the point is that there was this Ottoman Empire slowly reaching upwards towards Christendom, and Christendom itself was divided. Now, again, this is, I appreciate very much all the help that Mr. Lippert gave me in preparation for this presentation. And one point that he made that was true is that Islam as a political ideology is very simple. Command, conquer, rule. Christendom is fraught with nuance, ideas, differences, legitimate differences even. And as you know, the state of the Catholic monarchy in the Protestant Reformation was in crisis. The state of the episcopacy was also very much in crisis. And so those differences, though meaningful, were weakening Christendom from the inside against the simple and unified force. I want to introduce one of the main pivotal players, talk about Pius V. Pope St. Pius V was an answered prayer for the church. At this time of corruption and at this time of a lot of economic and social incentive for the Pope to be politically involved and to seek his own advantage, we had a Dominican become Pope. And this was a simple Dominican who was, at one point, he was a Grand Inquisitor, so he was used to getting his hands dirty. This was a guy who, when he ascended to power, continued to live a serious ascetic and spiritual life. And that allowed him not only to get a lot of good things done, like he published the Council of Trent, pretty important. He published all of St. Thomas's works. He issued a new Roman Catechism and Missal. He also was able to work with a lot of different groups within the church, these fractured groups, to strive towards unity. And he was all able to do that with a unique spiritual vision that was a grace of the office and was certainly also the result of his personal holiness. This is a picture of him depicted with St. Thomas. And I think that's St. Dominic down there. But as great as he was as an individual, he had all kinds of problems diplomatically. He was a great example of a holy person that didn't get things done the first time. He was faced with all kinds of failures. First of all, he had all kinds of rivalries that he had to arbitrate between different nations. France and Spain, England and Rome. Pick your country, they were probably in some sort of economic or political disagreement. And he wasn't able to solve it. One thing that's clear from the results of the Battle of Lepanto is that these political agendas are not necessarily responsive to holiness. They persisted. They still persist. We're going to talk about that. And importantly, he recognized that not only did he need to, sort of be a peacemaker and invite people to solve their problems diplomatically, but he had to do something real about the prospect of a Turkish invasion in Europe. Because the Turks were very explicit that this is what they wanted. They wanted to conquer Europe. And they had conquered everything related to Christianity that they could get their hands on. And so what he did on 12 different occasions and failed every time was to unite all of Christendom from a military perspective. So in other words, he tried to form some sort of armada of Christendom, in particular a naval armada, and failed 12 times. So just think about how many times you tried to do something that you think will be important for you and you failed. Well, have you done it 12 times? Now you can ask yourself that. Because this guy tried to unite naval fleets in Christendom. He was a man who not only had a rich devotional life, but he urged direct action and was trying to get people in place to get action done. And then the thing that's beautiful about it is he had all these spiritual practices in his personal life, and that he asked the church to do as Pope to ensure that God would provide because we were doing everything we could. So, unfortunately, some evil things had to happen before Pope St. Pius V's prayers were answered. The first evil thing that happened was the siege of Malta. Now, Malta is just south of Italy, south of Sicily, and it was a very important strategic naval area because it was basically central in the Mediterranean Sea. And so what the Turks did is they invaded with 40,000 Ottomans, 40,000 Islamic soldiers. And they had to do this against 500 Knights of Malta. Now, the Knights of Malta were sort of like the 300 of Thermopylae. They were the elite soldiers. They were the best. They may have been Christendom's best ever. And amazingly, over 4 months, 2/3 of the Knights of Malta and the Maltese survived. But only a quarter of the Turks survived. So 500 versus 40,000. Glorious, but ultimately, nevertheless, a big loss for Malta. And a loss not in final victory, but a loss in the kind of threat that the Turks were presenting. So it was a loss in this sense that the Turks showed that they were willing to go right south of Italy and try to conquer a naval stronghold. It was a loss in that they were willing to persist until they were almost all decimated. It was a victory in this important and final sense that it proved, first of all, that the Turks could be defeated. Finally, the Maltese won. They conquered. And it was also very important because what it demonstrated, especially to the likes of St. Pius V, that in spite of political divisions, people united for a cause and strong in faith could actually accomplish a task. And so the idea was that this was an answered prayer. This was an answered prayer that showed that the church could be defeated. You have to understand that this was like probably 400 years of straight victories against the Christians, and this was the first one that they were able to finally stop. So it was a serious siege in 1565 that the Maltese were able to stop. Here's a quote from Elizabeth I, who students here probably know how despicable Elizabeth I is. A vile English queen who rejected the church and was excommunicated by St. Pius V. Her quote, this is sometimes what happens, the enemy will tell you exactly what's going on. If the Turk should prevail against the Isle of Malta, it's uncertain what further peril might follow the rest of Christendom. So, I mean, here's someone who is an enemy of Christendom, recognizing that if the Turks prevailed, that it was uncertain what would happen here. She ended up siding with the Turks. So, I mean, just be mindful of that. Just because you see things with clear eyes doesn't mean you're in the light. You have to choose what side you're on. And unfortunately, Elizabeth did do that. Next major setup that led to the Battle of Lepanto, another scene I want to set was the Isle of Cyprus. Cyprus is just off the coast of Turkey. It was that second little island I pointed at when we looked at the big map. And this was an island that was possessed by the Venetians, so Roman Catholics, for a relatively short period of time, since 1489. In this city, there was two major strongholds. There was Nikiosa, and I always get the second name wrong. Famagusta on the coast. And both of these strongholds allowed Cyprus, which was very close to the Ottoman Empire, to nevertheless maintain a place of strong Catholic identity and business very close to the Turks. Now Cyprus, there's a map up there, of course, by the way, where it is. It's just south of Turkey, by Syria. This is a modern map, obviously. So you can see it's further west than that, you can see. So it's deeper into enemy territory. Cyprus had these two strongholds, and they were known especially for their beautiful red wine, and that was especially interesting to another character I'm going to introduce, Sultan Selim II, the Sot. My dear students, Sot isn't exactly a word that you probably are calling each other, so I'll just tell you what Sot is. It's a drunkard. It's a very derogatory word for a drunkard. Here we have Selim II enjoying himself a little red wine. Here he is. He was a serious drunkard. And when he was initially given power, he achieved it, first of all, through corrupt means. Here's just an example of the kind of corruption we're talking about at the highest levels of the Ottoman Empire. His half-brother was strangled to death, and his other brother was killed in a coordinated effort with his dad. So this guy sent him to power by killing his brother with his dad's help. Good family. He didn't have any respect by his legions, though, because he was a drunk. He didn't like ruling an empire. He even had a slogan: "Keep Selim drunk." He had his own doctrine. That was actually what he promulgated as what his goal was. But he did love wine from Cyprus. And there was a Jew that was an advisor to him that finally convinced him to conquer Cyprus. And this is interesting too, because of course Cyprus, being so close to the Ottoman Empire, had a peace treaty with them. And that peace treaty was signed on the Quran. It was an Islamic peace treaty. And in order for the Sot to break this treaty, he had to go to his Islamic priest for an edict so that the treaty could be broken. And that treaty was broken by a divine command from these priests to conquer all the lands that were once theirs. So the previous legitimate treaty to aid commerce was rendered, and a battle ensued. It was an ugly one. Cyprus fell. Cyprus fell because the Ottoman Empire, the Sot, sent 100,000 men to conquer it. There's only 15,000 men in Cyprus. The first city, Nicosia, fell, the central city with lots of atrocities. And when we talk about war atrocities in the Middle Ages, they're just as bad as in modern atrocities. They took all the women who were adults and beheaded them. They took all of the children, men, boys and girls, and sold them as sex slaves. There were very few survivors in Nicosia. Then Famagusta, which was a stronghold city, it was a military city, was besieged. But there was an old general, General Bragadino, who loved the city and was able to protect it for a long time. And actually, as a result of his defenses, 80,000 Turks were lost. So here's a brief that we're going to talk at the end about different themes here. Here's one I might not return to. Love of the homeland. That's clearly a theme in the Battle of Cyprus. These people were willing to fight to the bitter end for their land. When he was parleying peace, Bragadino had a collapse in negotiations because the Islamic commander demanded the page to keep as a slave, presumably a sex slave that he would then kill. It was very bad, very ugly. And Bragadino, who was trying to arrange these peace terms according to what were then even more clear and more clearly agreed upon terms of peace, rejected that. And so as a result, more atrocities followed. And I wanted to just highlight the degree of atrocities that followed just to Bragadino himself so that you understand what it took to awake Christendom. This is a little laborious, so I apologize, but this is what specifically happened. Bragadino, first of all, had his nose and ears cut off. Then he was forced to crawl like a dog and kiss this Islamic commander. Then he was tied to a chair, lifted to the highest point of the mast of their highest ship, and then dropped into the ocean. He was still alive. And then they tied him to a column in the town and they skinned him alive. And he died when they say the knife reached his belly button. So he was a tough little cookie, huh? Wow. It was truly an atrocity in a period of many atrocities. And when he was skinned, they took his skin and they stuffed it with hay. And they led around a cow with his skin stuffed with hay around the town. And then they emptied that out and they hung him like a windsock from the mast of their ship. It was an abomination. And I'm sorry to rest on these gory details, but that's what it took to form a Christian response to Islam in this century. And this is the Holy League, finally. The Holy League finally came into being as a result of this in 1571. Pius V, in the face of these atrocities, got all the maritime states of the Mediterranean together, except France. And that's one thing that's crazy, is that this kind of thing happened and people couldn't still agree, hey, we've got to stop this from happening. Incredibly disgusting. Venice even didn't join initially. Venice was the one that was threatened the most. I mean, Venice was the possessor of the island that had just been taken, and they weren't even willing to be on board because they thought it might disrupt their economic life or whatever. I mean, it was terrible. And then, of course, most of Europe rejected this league that the Pope called them to. And once it was organized, the fleet was disorganized, and initially they were sent to try to save Cyprus or do something to stop what was happening there, and they were too late. It was very tragic. I mean, they heard about the atrocities and thought maybe we could get over there and save people, but it was too late. So even though the fleet was finally formed, there were still some serious problems. Blue is over. But at least it existed, and now it was time for action. So what came next? Well, finally we're getting towards the Battle of Lepanto. Lepanto, by the way, is just a coastal base for the Turks, from which they launched their ships in this battle. So it wasn't like the Lebanese Sea or anything. It was in the Mediterranean Sea, near the Islamic coast, and that's why it's called Battle of Lepanto. Now, we have this beautifully shod young man called Don Juan. And he was a heartbreaker. This was a charming, dancing, singing nobleman who was the bastard son of Charles V. Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor. So one of the probably top 3 most powerful people in Europe. He was a half-brother of the King of Spain. Remember, we had Austria and Spain as 2 parts of the Ottoman Empire. And he, as a result of having this less than perfect lineage, decided to dedicate himself to military campaigns, and he had great success. So he was a distinguished commander. And one of the things that was interesting about him was, in spite of imperfections, he was a ladies' man, and he was young. This guy's 24 when the Battle of Lepanto happened. He nevertheless understood the need for Christendom to be protected and restored. And so Don Juan of Austria was a noble man. In fact, Chesterton has a beautiful line about it. And you guys have your Lepanto here. Lepanto calls it, the poem of Lepanto by G.K. Chesterton describes him as the last knight of Europe. The last knight of Europe. And here we can talk a little bit about chivalry and the importance of protecting those who are weak and endangered. And in this case, it was all Europe and Christendom. And to have someone who's not qualified, and someone who's too young, comes from an illegitimate bloodline, to take up this responsibility as the general of the league was something heroic. It was truly heroic, and it was a sacrifice that was not in his favor. So here we are moving into the actual battle. The Holy League finally deploys. The Holy League consisted of some very interesting ships. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. First of all, did you understand that still in this period, the way that ships worked was with rowers? I mean, it was all galley ships. And this goes all the way back to ancient Greece, so it's marvelous that even though in some ways civilization had advanced so much, we still have very primitive technology as far as maritime warfare was concerned. And galley ships were small ships that typically had something between 20 and 30 rowers, and then 5 people at each oar. They were generally low to the ground. They were designed to be fast. And the way that battles work with galley ships is really interesting. You ride right up next to them, throw a rope over, throw a hook over, and then you board, and you hand-to-hand combat. Pretty intense. There was ammunition that was being developed at the time, but it was still experimental and not the core way that battles were won. Galley fleets were extremely violent means of victory. Maritime warfare was very risky. It was scary. One of the things that was very interesting was the Venetians, aware of the kind of threat that they were coming under, were secretly developing new technology. So that is, again, an interesting theme here, is that through stealth and through secret plans shared with Rome, they developed a new type of ship called the galleass, which was a larger galley ship that was originally built off of a cargo ship, actually. So it would be like taking imagine like an oil tanker and weaponizing it or something. That's certainly the equivalent. And what they did is they made them taller, and they enabled them to shoot cannons from the sides, shoot weapons from the sides. That was something new. That was a new idea that instead of just boarding and engaging in combat that way, or firing guns or firing cannons from the front, you would actually do side-by-side shots on the ship. It was a precursor to what's called the ships of the line, which was the ships that we think of when we think of like Master and Commander, you know, great maritime ship movies, motorized ships, basically, the last of the pre-motorized ships. And so these ships were serious and formidable, and as you can see, they had tons of guns and tons of infantry in their fleet. It wasn't small. And they deployed. They deployed to go meet the Turks, who they knew were off the coast of Lepanto. The Turks, though, of course, were the dominant military force at the time, as I said. They had 337 total boats. One thing that I think is an interesting little tidbit that we'll get back to is on their flagship, they had a flag of Muhammad that was embroidered with the name of Allah 29,800 times. It was embroidered in gold. It was a green flag. And the Turkish fleet rowed out to meet the Christian fleet in the shape of a crescent, of course, on our all, and that was their strategy. When all of the battle was about to go down, a very important spiritual aspect was happening in Rome, and that was Pope St. Pius V was utilizing all of the means that he had at his disposal to solicit help from Our Lady and from all of the Christians to pray for victory. First of all, he gave plenary indulgences to soldiers. He was responsible for eating priests in all the ships to say masses and to hear confessions, priests of a variety of religious orders. Many of the men who were rowing the galleys were criminals, actually, so that's something that's interesting. Christian criminals, Don Juan, in an effort to help them see that they were fighting for something noble, freed those criminals on the ships. Pope St. Pius V issued motu proprios, I think is what they were called, to all of Europe to pray the rosary. And to pray the rosary specifically for the sake of the victory of this battle that was coming very quickly. Actually, on the eve of the battle, I want to just read a couple things here because this is quite lovely. The Holy League prepared their souls by falling on their knees at the decks of their galleys and praying the rosary. Back at Rome and up and down the Italian peninsula at the behest of Pius V, churches were filled with the faithful telling their needs. And of course, the Blessed Mother was listening. Here is the signal flag of the Holy Fleet. And as you can see, there's Christ on the cross, and then there were 3 shields, 3 crests signifying the 3 main players that we're going to be talking about on 3 different sides of the battle. And the battle, interestingly, began with a gust of wind. It began with a gust of wind initially against the Christians. Christians rowed up to meet the Muslims, and they were having to row against the wind. Not a very good thing when you're talking about speed being a major factor, and especially with the new galleasses being ships that were specifically designed to be sort of strange, to take you off guard, and to attack you in a way that wasn't expected. So initially the battle looked very bad. But nevertheless, the prayers of the Christians were answered, and the wind shifted 180 degrees. And this drove into battle all of the Christians effectively. And what was interesting about this was that the galleass ships were able to implement the strategy that they were hoping for the most part. So there were 6 full ships, 4 of them were able to ride into battle. And what they did is they went right into the center. And here's another interesting fact. 2 of the brothers of the man of Cyprus who was brutalized were able to lead these ships into battle. So they were able to seek what I would consider a holy vengeance. Riding into battle, they were able to straightaway 4 ships destroy 75 Turkish ships. So this new concept of fighting worked, and it destroyed 75 vessels straight away. And then something very interesting happened that we'll go back to. Don Juan of the Real, the flagship, fired a cannon shot challenging the Turkish commander Ali Pasha for a one-on-one battle. That is also very unusual in this type of galley warfare. And what it signaled, I think, was courage. It signaled a deliberate choice to lead it, to demonstrate the convictions that they were fighting for. It wasn't just showing off. Now, things went differently on the left and on the right. On the left, the galleys locked up, and there was hand-to-hand combat everywhere. And hand-to-hand combat here involved firearms, but it also involved swords. So there was mostly sword fighting. And you have to understand that the kind of sword fighting that would happen on a ship like this was very ugly. There was all kinds of injuries. You'd keep fighting if you were injured, etc. If you fell into the water, you'd try to get out, get back in the fight. Agostino Barbarigo, did I say that right, John? He was a nobleman on the left side of the fleet who were able to prevent the Turks from flanking the fleet, which flanking, again, was a sign that you had a superior position. You'd be able to raid the ships and slaughter those that were on board. But he was nevertheless slain by an arrow, so this is something that's interesting. I could probably spend another 10 minutes talking about weapons technology, because that's something that's interesting to me. Firearms were more advanced in Europe at this point than they were by the Turks. And so the Turks had guns, but the Turks were very good at this old technology. So they had arrows that were made out of composite materials, which, by the way, good arrows are still made out of composite materials, that were used to be able to shoot further and more accurately against the Christian armada. And so this captain was slain. But in the midst of this chaos, the Christian slaves that were on the Muslim ships were able to get free. They broke their chains. And as a result of that, they were able to come out of these Turkish ships and turn the tide. Now, by the way, I mean, the way that galley rowers worked if you were a slave was you were just chained to your post. You didn't leave. So for you would literally use the bathroom in your spot. You would fall asleep sitting on it. So these were tortured people, tortured Christians who had been kidnapped, by the way, who in their very much to their peril, decided to act on behalf of the Christian beliefs. So that's on the left. On the right, however, things weren't so good, thanks to this pleasant-looking fellow. This is Andrea Doria, a Spanish admiral. Now, the Spanish were very hesitant about getting engaged in this military operation because they benefited from the Turks and also wasn't threatening them directly. And this Spanish admiral on the right tried something that is still disputed amongst historians what his motives were. What he tried doing was breaking rank and basically separating himself from his fleet with the idea that through an indirect maneuver, perhaps, he would be able to gain some advantage. That is the positive reading of what he did. The negative reading is that he was a coward and was trying to protect his ships. And I don't have a strong enough opinion on this to weigh one way or the other. But one thing that was clear was that as a result of this maneuvering, he created a weakness in Christian defense. And so what happened was the enemies stopped attacking him and they cut to the center, and they surrounded the center attack. But here's something really cool. The Maltese, who had lost previously, were able to rise to the occasion and stop that weakness and save the center ship, save the flagship of the Christians. So here we are finally at the climax of the battle. This battle had been raging 5 hours of hand-to-hand combat. Okay, so some of you guys who are learning fencing here at the school, how fast are you out of breath? 30 seconds or something? I mean, we're talking about absolutely grueling warfare. What had happened in the center since that initial success was something that wasn't good. The Turkish had an elite force called Janissaries. And the Janissaries were actually kidnapped Christians that were trained to be special fighters. And they were sent on to the decks of the Real, the flagship of the Christians. But at a critical moment, someone who had been appointed by the Pope came to the rescue. The second in command, Arcantiano Colonna, and I apologize if I'm butchering these names. He basically, it sounds like, John told me the details of this story earlier today. He came in with his ship and swept his mast across, actually knocking the Turks back onto their ship, and thereby securing the Real. And in the midst of this fighting, the Turkish commander, Ali Pasha, was mortally wounded. And then, here's another interesting thing. I guess a crazy galley slave who would be free cut his head off. And he brought it to Don Juan, and Don Juan didn't want it because it was dishonorable, so he threw the head into the water. Well, someone else rescued it and put it on a lance. And I guess that demoralized the Turks significantly. So it's interesting that with an opportunity for the Christians to sort of play tit for tat, the leaders weren't choosing to do that. Well, at that point, the Turks were demoralized. Their fleet had been destroyed. There's only 13 surviving ships and 30,000 Turks had been slain. And as we were saying, the Christians had been freed. They estimated it was somewhere around 10 to 15,000 Christians that were freed. And that is considerable, considering it's somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 Christians that were killed in the battle. So it was a victory. a profound victory. And it was such a profound victory that Pius X, back in Rome, even had a sense of it. He was conducting his business knowing that the battle was happening, and he stopped. And he said, there's no time for business right now, we need to pray. This is where we have some very beautiful things in the poem Lepanto, praising Don Juan for his glory and praising God for the glory, Domino Gloria, trying, let's say it hot, Don Juan of Austria is shouting to the ships. People had been freed from their slavery. The losses, though significant, were minor in comparison to the impact that it had on the Ottoman Empire. This was basically a victory that indicated that the Ottomans could no longer control the Mediterranean, and therefore their hope to invade Europe was stopped. So it was a profound victory that saved Europe. And as a result of this, St. Pius V designated this battle day as the day of Our Lady of Victory and Our Lady of the Rosary. Now here are some little interesting facts that I thought that I would share with you before we talk a little bit more broadly about the significance of this battle. First of all, I want to talk to you about some of the sort of miraculous stories that have persisted over the years. So, in one galley ship, a soldier of the Holy League, his soul, torn with despair, took his sword towards the ship's crucifix. The blade shattered, and then later when they tried to reforge it, as soon as they took it out of the forge, it shattered again. Amazing. The crucifix on the board of the Real, the flagship, was twisted. It twisted itself to avoid a cannonball. So that cross is still preserved in Barcelona. And lastly, and I think that this is quite poetic and real justice, Selim II, the Sot, was crushed when he heard the news, and a man known for his blood didn't eat for 3 days. And later he died in a bath when he was drunk. He slipped and fractured his skull. So Our Lady, as it were, crushed the head of the snake. Final considerations. There's a lot we can talk about with this historical thing. First of all, why do we study history? This is a question that I was trying to ponder and bring to the forefront of the conversation. First of all, we study history because this is actually something intrinsically worth knowing. This is a story of eternal values, which is the whole notion of classical education. That there are some things that humanity has accomplished that are just worth celebrating. History is worth knowing in itself. But of course, things that are worth knowing in themselves have genuine value. So that's where I think there's many opportunities for spiritual, political, and prudential considerations in the course of considering this event. First of all, and this is something that I'm grateful for my conversations again with Mr. Lippert, this was not a victory that was primarily the result of human strength. In many ways, this was the result of the opposite of human strength, the result of very disorganized, conflicted people having a spiritual conviction, and then God blessing them when they took ownership of that thing that was very weak, and giving them what He intended, not necessarily what they deserved. It's not by might nor by power, but by Spirit, says the Lord. Sounds familiar, maybe in the school on a bad day. We are an institution that needs God's help. We still are. Nevertheless, there was genuine human virtue, especially courage, that was shown, as well as mercy. You know, the Turks were not tortured in any way similar to the Christians were. There was many opportunities for humility, of course, with St. Pius V. Here's something interesting. There was an intolerance of corruption at the highest levels. And that's something that is very important these days. First of all, what we learned was that corruption was making Christendom incompetent. That was just the first sign that Christendom was in a bad place. Second of all, and this is much worse, is it was making Christendom spiritually degenerate, and therefore it was leading to more corruption. And so it's very important to understand that the church needs purification in every era, and that decadence and corruption is always a threat to the church internally. And that in some ways that threat is more fundamental than outside threats. Because military arms, strategy, those are sort of things that you can achieve mastery of. But the spiritual battle is something that you stand to lose permanently if you lose it. There's a real enemy here, not just Sulan Assad, but also a real enemy, which was the forces of evil against Christendom. And there was a real person who caused victory, Our Lady. And so my final considerations and my comments on the practicality of going to battle are, we should still depend on Our Lady. We are still a church that suffers corruption in deep and terrifying ways, and we don't have what it takes, humanly speaking, to combat it. But we do have the spiritual resources. We have Mary. More than anyone else, she's there for us. She understands all of our individual needs, and she also understands the needs of our institutions and of our societies. We need to entrust those things to her. And we need to understand that victories that come are not going to be the result of simply ingenuity, even though we should all do our due diligence, but the result of prayer and the result of a commitment and a belief that God is going to bring about the good things that He intends, that He will make all things new. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm happy to take some questions, although this is the part that is kind of making me nervous because it'll show this is my preparation. But who has comments or questions? Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Could you, I'm not clear, but could you, if you have any knowledge, on the knights, the military orders, how did those military orders, I understand that they were like a religious order, but they were military in nature. Right. How were those men, for instance, Malta, able to defeat such a overwhelming number?
Right. No, that's true. So that very interesting question. So the Knights of Malta are an excellent example of something that I think is true of the human condition, namely the fact that when you make promises and vows, they bind you to something higher. And so the Knights of Malta were a hierarchical order, they still are, an elite order that was originally military in focus, but also designed to preserve society. And so the Knights of Malta were very self-selected. The Knights of Malta were picking the best. And the people that rose in the ranks of Malta rose because of the graces and the merits that they were able to learn themselves. That's something that should still be true in Christendom, in my opinion. That there should be a hierarchy that is based on objective merit. And I don't think that's a particularly aristocratic thing to say. I think that God deigns providence so that certain people have certain gifts, and if they don't use those gifts, or if they use them wrongly, then His will isn't able to be executed. Does that answer your question, John? Thank you. Other comments or questions? Save room for Miss Logan, maybe? Oh, we have a question over here. Mr. Locke, go ahead.
You had those stories about like the cross being avoided, being destroyed, and those verses because.
Yeah, is there a Liberty Girl one? I know you were telling me some of that. Oh yeah, so Cervantes, of course, the great author of Don Quixote, was in this battle, and he was wounded. And so here's something amazing about him. He had a fever, and he was told by his captain, "You're sick. You can just, go underneath and not directly fight." He said, "No, I'm here to fight." And he did fight, and he was wounded by, 2 arrows and a sword wounds as well. He survived. And then later on, like 5 years later, he was captured by the Muslims for 4 years. And then he went on to write one of probably the greatest novel in Spanish literature. It is a gorgeous novel. I encourage you to read it sometime. So he understood the idea of sacrificing his individual talent for the sake of conflict. That is definitely what's what I read. Remarkable. Other questions? Yes. Lovely one.
To speak about something like this in history, and to say that, Our Lady's fighting won the battle, you're not going to get that telling of history from a lot of places. I guess the question is what differs
Yeah, that's a very good question. So here's another way of putting the question. This is the way that Nietzsche puts it, actually, and I was reading this after overhearing the juniors talking about Nietzsche's history. Nietzsche thinks history only has value if it produces action. In other words, basically if it has useful value, not if there's some sort of higher value. That's a paraphrase of a more complex position, I think. But the idea is that can you study history that way? Well, I would say that there's a way in which you can do that, but what you're doing is you're risking the final cause of history. History is not just about events, it's about the reason for those events. And if you're going to truly, in an objective way, consider all the reasons for those events, you have to be willing that there might be meanings that are simply beyond human reasons for those things. And that's really an argument for Christianity on the whole, that actually history makes more sense when you consider divine providence. I mean, just consider the fact that those chosen people that the Messiah appeared to. Sorry, tough on you. I mean, think about how unlikely it is that Christ could have appeared unless there was some divine providence for the Jewish people. Consider the likelihood that the faith would have been spread throughout the world the way that it had, and so many people would give their lives, unless there was some spirit beyond man that was inspiring them to do those things. It's frankly less likely, or the explanation is less tenable if you remove the spiritual dimension from it. Especially in this case, I almost want to talk about this a little bit, just talk about all the negative things, talk about all the things that went wrong with Lepanto, and somehow they still went. Because it is true that it wasn't like, oh, they were totally incompetent idiots, and they happened to win by accident. Like, whoops, we just won. You know, what a great victory. We just killed 40,000 people. No, it was a result of imperfection, persevering in spite of that. And that there was genuine heroism in addition to the help of divine grace. Yes, Mr. Go ahead.
So I'm interested in your personal thoughts. What do you think about a military religious order today? Would there be a place for that? As long as I'm at the top.
No, I mean, I think that the secular alternative to Christendom is pretty bad. And I think that the more that the West has been secularized, the more that we're going to see the rise of atrocities, not unlike what we're describing here. I think that I guess I'm not prepared to propose a replacement of American democracy with a Catholic monarchy at this very moment. But I think that there does need to be a serious reckoning of how, as Catholics, we can continue to exist in a world that is more and more directly opposing and punishing our beliefs, and utilizing whatever tactics are available to discredit good Christians. So, I mean, it's a good question. I think that you should give a lecture on it next time. Yes?
Okay, could you address the goal of St. Pius V was to stop the Turkish or the Muslim invasion of Europe? What was the result of the battle, and were there lasting effects?
Yes, very good question. So there were some lasting effects. As I mentioned, the Ottoman Empire was demoralized as a result of this, and so the dominance of the Mediterranean was never the same. And I didn't study this as much today in preparation for this, but from what I saw, it looked like the trajectory of the Ottoman Empire afterwards was decline, and steady decline. So in some ways, this did stave off the invasion of Europe by the Muslims, but only in the specific way that this battle was fought with regard to maritime battles. The idea of a caliphate being erected in Europe is still very much alive, obviously, and a real threat to Europe. And so there's a way in which Islam specifically still presents a threat to the West. And I think we need to have an honest conversation about that. The same way we need to have an honest conversation about corruption in the church, corruption in politics, the sort of things that if we act like they aren't a problem, they're only going to get worse. More specifically, in the short term, the Ottoman fleets were decimated most importantly with regard to people who could manage ships. So that was the short-term reason why the Mediterranean wasn't overtaken again by Turks right away, because they could build ships quickly. They didn't have skilled people to man those ships. They did eventually get a lot of the political influence still carried out. And so like the map that I showed you, where Cyprus ended up being Muslim in the short term, there's still a lot of background. Moreover, and this is one thing that I think is sad, that, Mr. Liberty gave me a spare for this reminds me, Christendom wasn't reunified as a result of this. The Holy League was disbanded very shortly after, was it 2 years after? Never came back. Christendom could have reunited, and they decided not to because they had squabbles, they had political interests, they had economic interests, and they were all superficial compared to the prospects of united Christendom. And I think that that's one thing we need to think about as Catholics sometimes, is what can we do to unite and to be strong in our Catholic identity, and what's getting in the way? We have political agendas in the church, I'll put it that bluntly, are getting in the way of us most purely living a Catholic identity as a church. And we need to identify those things and we need to try to fix it. One of those things is education, which is why I'm here. So, while you guys are here. Other comments and questions? Well, I hope I was a good substitute, Ms. Logan.
Yeah.
Please do talk to her with her thoughts. She wrote a very elegant paper on this that I took some things from, and a lot of it I left so that when we talk to her, she has her own perspective on to share. Let's please conclude with prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was known that anyone who fled to thy protection, or thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left empty. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Students, drive home safely. God bless you. See you on